Welcome to Game Changers live from Miami, Florida. My name is Sergio Tigera. I'm your host. And each and every week, we bring you someone who has been a game changer in their field and who's touched the lives of thousands to get their perspective on their journey, their mindset, their struggles and successes so that we can inspire you on your journey. So let's get started right now. And welcome to Game Changers Live. My name is Sergio. You can catch us each and every week on your favorite podcast channels. And thank you so much for all your support that you've given us. We're very proud to say that we're now a top 2% podcast ranked globally by Listen Notes. And we're coming to you from our beautiful home studio now located on the campus of FIU in Miami in the College of Communications, Architecture, and the Arts, which is very, very fitting for my guest today, which is Mr. Richard Blanco. So Richard is an American poet, public speaker, author, and professional engineer. He's the fifth poet to read at the United States presidential inauguration, having read the poem One Today for Barack Obama's second inauguration. He's the first immigrant, the first Latino, and the first openly gay person at the time, the youngest person to be the U.S. inaugural poet. And recently, he was also given the title as the first ever poet laureate at Miami-Dade County. And he's an FIU grad as well. So Panthers, Paul's up, my friend. He's coming to us from Maine. How are you, Richard?
Pretty good. Probably a lot cooler than you are down there in Miami right now. It's 62.
Absolutely.
Today, so.
Yeah, it's like 100 here. It feels like 100 in Miami, but we're nice and chill and cool here inside the studio home. So my friend, you've had a storied career. And I love the fact that you hail from Miami, Florida, and especially the Westchester neighborhood, which is where we're at right now, where I call home. There's a lot of memories there for those of you who aren't from Miami. There's a strong Cuban heritage, Cuban background in this Westchester neighborhood. And one of the things that has driven you in your career and in your poetic life and so forth has been this concept of home. Right. And that's been a huge influence on you. Tell me about what it was like for you growing up.
Sure. So first of all, we have to say it's Guacheted.
Exactly. You get it right.
That's how I say it. That's how I spell it. Well, it's kind of interesting. Like sometimes you look back on your life and it feels like part of it has been scripted. As I like to say, I was made in Cuba, assembled in Spain, and imported to the United States. So my mother left 7 months pregnant from Cuba, pregnant with me. I was born in Madrid, and 45 days after my birth, we emigrated again to the United States, and first to New York and eventually to Miami, and I was about 4 years old. So why I say that is because basically at that age, I think my obsession with home, or my question of home, or little Ricky would end up growing up to think about and write about, I think was already planted. Those seeds were planted there, right? Growing up in Miami and in Westchester in particular, when it wasn't completely Cuban in 1972, there were still some Anglos hanging around. But Miami in general was a really interesting place that makes one question the sense of home. I always like to say that I grew up between two real imagined worlds. One was the Cuba of my parents and grandparents and the whole exile community, this place that I came from, but wasn't born there, never been there, and yet felt so real at the same time. And then the other one was America or the United States, which I think it was Liz Balmaceda who said we love living in Miami because it's so close to the United States. So there was this other mythic homeland that I had too, that was only what I saw on TV sitcoms and commercials. And so a lot of my childhood was spent not consciously, because you're not thinking that deeply at 7 years old, but it's affecting you, just negotiating those worlds, right? And trying to find out who you are between these spaces. And eventually when it came time to write, that was my go-to. That was the question that I think I was always born with.
And so did writing come to you very naturally? Did observing the world around you and putting words to that, did that just come naturally to you as a gift? Or is that something that you were interested in and then you trained to become that?
Yeah, no, I if you would have told me at 22 that I was going to be a poet, I would have laughed in your face. I mean, I was always a left brain, right brain person. I love all kinds of knowledge. I score exactly the same in all those standardized tests between verbal and analytical. I had no doing in that. That's the way that's the way my genes wired me. So, but really the circumstances were, growing up in a working class or lower working class immigrant family in Westchester, the idea of a career in the arts or the arts in general wasn't really not that my parents denied it to me. It just wasn't part of the realm of possibility. We weren't talking
Right.
about Picasso around the dinner table. So like many immigrants, like many exiles, we studied something practical, and I studied engineering. I loved it. I loved math. Math to me is another kind of language. I feel like I've lost, but yeah, I studied engineering, and lo and behold, when I started working in my consulting office, where I ended up working for over 20 years, um, about half my job was writing things they don't tell you in school, writing reports and studies and letters, and understanding language and communication skills were so key to your success, to your career. Even especially writing proposals for your requests for proposals. Proposals are, for the most part, a narrative. They're about your vision for the project, etc. But anyway, for understanding the power of language, and I started becoming the go-to person for all kinds of writing. And then I just started geeking out on language and thinking, oh, this is kind of cool. What else can I do with language? And I thought, what do I know nothing about? Poetry. Let's do that.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so I guess I always had a creative side. I just never knew how it would be expressed. I recently realized that part of why I went to language was because I don't remember ever not knowing two languages since a little kid. So, I think that imprinted in me as well. Like translating for my parents at 5 years old, like little words, not whole conversations, but understanding that language was power, understanding that language was a way of thinking in the world, that the way my parents thought was could be different than the way I thought in English. So I think when it came time to sort of do something creative, I naturally ended up thinking about language, or coincidentally, all that came together. Um, and yeah, I think that's when I started writing, and I was about 27, and I wasn't thinking about a career change, as I like to joke. Um, Many interviewers think that the story goes something like, "I was forced to study engineering, and then saw poetry, and the clouds parted, and the cherubs came down
Right.
and took me away." And I was always like to joke, yeah, I wanted to go into poetry full time because there's so much money in it. But I
Such a
felt an
lucrative career.
ethical obligation to stay in engineering. But I didn't have a career change in mind. I just wanted to add to my resume. And so I just started baby steps, like everything in life. I think, if we think about where we are today, is probably a series of really small but important decisions, but pretty small. So I just took a class at Miami-Dade College back when it was Miami-Dade College, a community college.
Community college,
And
right?
just started exploring little by little, started learning and started growing. Eventually applied to the MFA program at FIU, where I teach now. I was rejected the first time because I was pretty novice writer, but they did ask me to take some graduate classes because they saw some potential. Reapplied again the second year I got in, et cetera, et cetera. The rest is kind of history. But yeah, I often, I think we tend to romanticize sometimes our own biographies or the biographies of others as if we had mapped out every single thing in our lives. But I think a lot of life is just paying attention and being open to your creative curiosities, your intellectual curiosities, and just not getting stuck. Just
Yeah.
even if it's something just for your own enrichment, you never know where it's going to lead to. And that was kind of what poetry was. I was just doing it because I was like, let me learn about this. This is fun. This is interesting.
And see,
This is
that is just it's mind blowing because so number one, you said you're fortunate enough to be born with the right brain, left brain equal because you are equally strong, and from both perspectives. Then at 27, you begin dabbling around in poetry. you get rejected going into FIU. If somebody had told that person at FIU, you just rejected the future presidential poet, it's like, what? So there's some, it's amazing when you start looking back at, how did we not see it? Right? How do we not see it? Not only in those people, but how do we not see our own genius? The genius that lies within. And like you said, if you're not open to and curious about what you might be great at, you may never find out. Right?
Right.
I mean, what you just said, oh, let me start doing something I have no idea about, and it just happened to be something that's brilliant for you, that really leverages your talents and skills. I wonder how many people there are out there that just never tried it. Right? They could have been amazing.
Yeah, yeah. You never know, and I'm still trying things. Believe me, I'm like right now. I'm working on. I just finished a play that's in workshop right now. I'm also um, a co-executive writing producer for a TV series. Well, development of a TV series based on the memoir about Westchester. So I've always challenged
Fantastic.
myself. So I think it's that's what keeps me alive, and it doesn't have to be, I don't think it has to be something as radical, okay, engineer to poetry, but even trying something different within one's own field, right? Something that that might add to what you're already doing, but we just get comfortable, right? I think having an artistic sort of attitude towards anything, like whether you consider yourself an artist or not, is important. I always to be an artist, I always say, is to be part of something that doesn't exist yet, and that's both terrifying and exhilarating, because you're always on the verge of creating. But getting back to like even engineering itself, people think engineering is not a creative field. Okay, we're not writing poems, that's true, but we have to be creative because we're building stuff that doesn't exist also. So no two bridges that I built are the same. Everyone is different. You have a certain set of parameters and skills that you have, basic, but after that, every project just goes through its own evolution. So we're all in a way creators. If we think of ourselves that way, I think it's healthy, and creators just want to keep on creating and exploring. And learning, and it all sort of comes back. It all connects at some point. I think I became a better engineer, as I like to say, because I became a poet, and I became a better. I think I'm a better poet because I'm an engineer. So all these things sort of.
Compliment.
I always say, no knowledge is lost. It all connects and helps us in whatever our main endeavor is.
Yeah. So design is a big part of not only engineering, but also in poetry, right? You're designing an experience, you're designing a delivery that is supposed to move someone. Taking yourself back in the day when you were growing up, the Hispanic, or at least the Cuban society, was very homophobic. We all grew up with it. It was very difficult. It was an uphill battle, so to speak. At what point did you say, I know what I am, I want to design the rest of my life in a way that I can feel free and open, and not hide? What was that like, and how did that happen?
Sure. Yeah, I love that word design, because I always actually, Sergio, I always say a poem is designed. I mean,
Yeah.
it's creative, but at some point, the left brain is designed. When it get in the later stages of poem, language is left brain. So it's really interesting. They say, for example, in music, which has a lot of left brain, um, the left brain remembers the lyrics, the right brain remembers the melody.
Oh,
So that's kind of interesting. But yeah,
interesting.
designing. So it's kind of all, again, sort of is folded in together. I came out by today's standards, relatively late in my mid-20s. And of course, it's not like you wake up one morning and say, "I'm going to come out today." It's
Yeah,
and the
today's
rest
the day.
and it's over, and like life goes on and everything's great. It's a process for me. It's a process for all of us. It's a process for everyone, for the family. But I think again, there's a connection point here. I think being a writer, or as I started writing, and the idea of being able to envision myself as an artist in the world, also the way that writing and writing poetry in particular makes one investigate one's life, I think gave me, I don't want to say the courage, but kind of let me start seeing what the design of my life as a gay man would be, right?
Right.
The idea that this is a life that I can have and will have. And I think poetry helped me along the way in that sense. However, it's interesting. I never came out in my poetry, so to speak, until my third book. And partly was because I didn't know what story to tell, or what was my story. So I'm a gay man, big deal. Welcome to the club, and it was actually my grandmother, and who was my primary caretaker, and very homophobic, but also very xenophobic. So that anything that was sort of too American was also gay. So like oatmeal was gay, Fruit Loops was gay, the Brady Bunch was gay. So anyway, my
That's so
grandmother was my
funny.
way into telling a story, which is the particular story of a gay Cuban working class kid in Westchester, because I just didn't know what I wanted to write about. And then my third book, I figured that's what I really want to write about. And more than that, just thinking about, like you were saying, homophobia within the family, within the community, but also sort of gender roles, and thinking about the ironies of machismo. Whereas I don't know about your family, but in my family, the strongest people were the women. I mean, men thought they were in charge, right? Or were made to think they were in
Yeah,
charge. But ironically, if we look at, I think in general, our Latinx communities, the women, much like African American communities, the women are
very
really the
strong.
ones that hold it together, and so, and yet there is that irony where machismo, where it's the men who. So
Right.
anyway, I started to explore all those nuances, and I found the story to tell, something to design, so to speak.
Interesting. So, how did you end up becoming the presidential poet? What was that like? Because you started in your mid-20s dabbling in it. And what was the progression after that?
So I I graduated in 1997 with my Master in Fine Arts in Creative Writing at FIU. And my thesis was published shortly thereafter. So that was my first book. Then, yeah, I was engineer by day, poet by night, carried both careers. I had the time. I wasn't married, didn't have children, etc. So yeah, I just carried both career, published a second book, a third book, doing what I could in terms of going on readings and involving my community, poetry community, involving my engineers. My engineers would go to my poetry readings. It was great. Um,
Must have
um,
been interesting.
yeah. So, and then it was like kind of mid-career, and I was just sort of contemplating what to do next, what I might write next or whatnot. And I just had this really sort of kind of spiritual moment, where I kind of said, why am I doing this? I had a real sort of honest
Yeah.
conversation with myself.
Yeah.
Life was good. I was married. I don't, I didn't need poetry to be happy in life. I was happy, or I
Right.
should say, and I thought, you know what? But I could be more fulfilled because of practicing poetry. And I kind of just re-engaged, recommitted myself, or I should say, renewed my vows with poetry, and said, well, you know
Mhm.
what? If anything is going to be your legacy, it's this. So I love poetry. I love practicing it. I love what it does to me. I love the community of writers. I love how it changes my life. I love how it affects other people's lives. and just opened up myself to that new possibilities. I didn't know what that looked like, but I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to continue in engineering enough. And I just took a leap of faith and said, I'm just going to take time for myself, write, and see what happens. And about 2 months later, the White House calls. So,
Wow.
so I don't
hold on a
believe.
second. Hold on a second. So you quit your job?
Yeah, well, I had moved to Maine, so I
Or
was working
leave, right?
remotely, and like they sold the firm to this multinational, and I just said, you know what, I don't. That's not what I want to do. I don't want to work for some huge company, and my firm was pretty big. It was 300 people, but it was family. I was their 8th employee, so you can imagine.
Wow.
I was just, I had seniority, but it wasn't
Yeah.
just that; it was family, right? So just let it go and see, just I don't know what's next, but I'm gonna point in a certain direction and see what happens.
Yeah.
So
So
I
you
think
committed yourself, and then 2 months later, you get a call
yeah.
out of the blue.
Yeah. So there's no process for that. There, you don't get shortlisted. You don't apply to be presidential inaugural poet. They just give you a call, and the White House has your phone number.
No, they can find out.
Yeah, I thought it was a joke. Actually, I thought it was. I was like, what? Like, it took me a while to even get what they were saying.
You're thinking, yeah. You're calling from Uganda, and you want me to give you my social security number?
And they said, no, like Robert Frost and Maya Angelou. I'm like, oh. And I still didn't believe it. So
Like, come on.
I Googled the person that called me, and sure enough, it said, whatever presidential inaugural committee scheduler. So the person was the one in charge of all the talent.
Wow.
And then, I was driving. I was driving I'll never forget. I was driving to my home in Maine from a reading in New York City, actually. And you're not supposed to use a cell phone in Maine, but in Massachusetts, but I was stuck on the 495. So I was like, what the hell?
You're not supposed to use it, I guess, while you're driving?
Hands free,
Okay.
right? So
Right.
But I didn't have hands free back then. And thank God I took that call. It was really interesting. My first response.
I was gonna say, when you got that call, did you ask him, okay, well, how did you find me, or how did you hear about me, or why me? Did you ask those questions?
No, I didn't.
Or you said, I've been expecting your call. I've been.
Right. I got the call on 12/12/12, so December 12th,
Oh
2012.
wow!
I had to be on that podium in Washington on January 21st.
Wow!
So
So you had to prepare something for like a month's time, more or less, to be on national TV.
Because by the time when they released the news, by then you couldn't write because it was just a media blitz of interviews and stuff. So really about 3 weeks. And they asked me to write 3 poems. So 3 poems in 3 weeks. So I don't know yet. So I've had several opportunities. I've met with the president several times, and I've had an opportunity to ask him. But I don't want to. I mean, he kind of look each other in the eye, and he's like, "Don't ask me because I'm not going to tell you." And I was like, "Don't worry, I don't want to know." I think partly I have my romantic version of him reading my poems in the Oval Office, and I'm not, canceling his meetings with Putin or whatnot, which I'm sure he wouldn't have minded. I just going like, this Blanco is an amazing poet. I want him to read, or him and Michelle like snuggled in bed reading my poems and going, "Honey, we have to get Blanco for your inauguration."
Yeah.
I'm sure it was somewhere in between. Like they must have maybe, but you never know. Like maybe one of the daughters brought home my poetry is taught in schools. Maybe the daughters brought, or maybe it was just given a handful of poets that someone had researched, and but he did choose me personally. So there was something there. I think in conversations with him, the real connection is, remember what I just told you about, like Made in Cuba, Assembled in Spain. If I thought my biography was complicated, can you imagine Barack Obama's
Right.
biography, like raised in Hawaii, like mother this, father that, and moves to like, I
Yeah.
mean, talk about a negotiation of identity and then a layer of racial identity, right?
Yeah.
Which I think, we talked about little Ricky Obama sort of asking the same questions.
Yeah.
Who the hell am I? Where am I living? What is
Yeah.
America? Am I an American? What does this all mean? And so those same questions of, again, identity, home, belonging, I think are common ground.
So you wrote 3 poems, and then they got to choose one of them?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
the one I read. Yeah,
Okay.
obviously the one I read. Yeah.
And
The
what did
other
you do
the
with
other
the other 2?
the other two are published in my most recent poetry book called How to Love a Country, which
Mm,
is a bit of a different book for me. It's really asking the same, it's asking the same question of home, place, and identity, but a much larger scale. Because imagine you have written a poem for the entire country, the entire 40 million people know you now, right? So
right.
or know of you. And so I just started thinking and realizing from all the conversations, feedback, just traveling all around the country. I would spend like 90% of my time just traveling, doing lectures, readings, keynotes.
Wow.
um, Everybody was telling me the same thing. What I represented to them was that, they realized they already knew, they didn't know quite how they fit in America, if the American narrative included them, what does that mean?
Mm,
And so really asking the question of what is home, but really in a larger scale, right?
yeah.
What is home, not just to me, but to us, and not just Cubans, and not just Westchester, not just Miami, and not just Florida, but really what is so the book again is How to Love a Country, which is almost also a question mark, right? It's like, what
Mm,
is a country? How do we love such a thing? What does that mean? And how do we connect to that? So it digs into those questions both historically and also in present day, and especially book was published in 2014, and we thought things were bad then, but taking up the issues of political divide and whatnot, and thinking about, well,
right.
what are we not looking at? What questions aren't we asking about our history, about ourselves presently, and thinking about how poetry can create discourse, civic discourse, um, in ways that art can, that is not, you know, on the nose political, but rather
Right.
really thinking that about truth being in the gray somewhere, and how can we find again some common ground. So a lot of the book is very different book for me, and yet not right.
Yeah. No, but that must have been powerful. And when you stepped up to the stage and they called on you and you get up to that platform, you're looking out over this sea of people. What is going through your mind at that point?
Sure. So
It's gotta be.
um yeah, so a couple of things. One, when I got that phone call, at first I was terrified. I was just like, why? I was just the first thing that came to mind was like a really overwhelming sense of gratitude, not because I was going to be presidential inaugural poet, but because of my parents and my grandparents,
Uh,
and realizing that, we think that that we have written everything about our stories, but really so much is written before we even get up to bat, so to speak, right? The choices that my parents made, including leaving Cuba, the choices that my parents made in terms of always upholding education, no matter how poor we would not put the air conditioning on in Miami, Florida, just so we could afford to send us to parochial school, to St. Brendan,
wow.
Columbus. So those kinds of choices that you don't realize are shaping your life. And so I realized that that moment was only possible because of my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents, right? And it felt like that was the true beginning of my story, the story that I picked up and started to write, and now needed to finish writing for them, for myself. And so that was kind of the same kind of things that were going through my mind when I was up at the podium. I had two things. I had in my folder, I had one is a picture of my grandparents on my mother's side, whom I never met, who died in Cuba before I ever got to visit Cuba. I was reading to them and all my people.
Wow.
And all my ancestors. And then the other one was a note from my partner, from my sort of husband after 22 years, Mark. But the thing that was going through my head was, okay, so I love telling that. I wrote a whole little memoir about it. It's called For All of Us One Today, an inaugural poet's journey, because I needed to make sure that got recorded for other presidential inaugural poets. There's nobody to turn to really,
right. How do you mentor?
And 3 are already dead. So now there's
here's what to expect.
It's only Amanda Gorman, myself, and Elizabeth Alexander that know this experience.
It's a good club.
But
there you go.
It's really interesting because the ceremony itself, and it's not because, I'm an Obama fanatic or anything like that, but the inauguration is just really this really interesting moment. It's more, it really defines America much more than stupid 4th of July parades and all this stuff. It's a palpable sense of that we're all gathered here for something greater than any one person, even greater than Beyonce, who's sitting like 2 chairs down from me, even greater than James Taylor, even greater than the president. And there's a palpable sense that you are in service to something bigger than yourself. And so by the time we're halfway through, I actually wanted to get up and read them. I was like, come on, Kelly Clarkson, finish up. I want to
hit the stage.
I want this poem I want to give this poem to the country, not out of ego, but just as a gift. And and so that's what sort of ran through my mind. A couple things when I get up there, both the president and vice president stand up and shake my hand, and I'm like, oh my God, like I wasn't expecting that, but I should have. But I literally, they're sitting right behind me. And so I thought, the president of the United States just stood up and shook my hand.
In front of the entire nation, too.
From this little chubby boy, from a gay boy from Westchester. My mother sitting right there, grew up in a dirt floor home in Cuba. And I thought, if this isn't the American dream, I don't know what it is.
Like, I'm never going to wash this hand, right?
And then one little sort of interesting anecdote. So Gloria Estefan, of course, and Emilio, who are such supporters of all artists, but especially artists of our Cuban community, had sent word through my agent to said, tell them to look into that crowd and just embrace it and don't turn away from it, because it's only going to happen once. Right. And if you look in the video, I'm thinking about what Gloria said, and I just take about a second or two to look out over the crowd and just take it in for a second. And embrace it and be one with it. So that was also that's also why I wasn't that nervous, because in a sense, like I said, you feel part of something larger, and your ego sort of goes away, or it's one of those things in life that's just too big to fail. Like your ego doesn't try to like say,
right.
Up, what do you think you are? Or like you got to be perfect, like it just has its own life. So
wow, what a story. Richard, you're an inspiration, man, to so many Americans, but especially Cuban Americans and the Cubans here in Miami and Miami, Florida in general. With what you've done, it's been one of a kind. If you haven't watched his presidential poem address, please check it out on YouTube. You can find more info as well on his website, which is richard-blanco.com. Thank you so much for everything you do. Keep up the great work. It's been incredibly inspirational, and hope to see you down here in Miami soon. As we said, as we get together with all the past Game Changers, and hopefully you can read a poem that night too. So thanks, you, my friend.
I love it. Thanks for the work you do. It takes a village to keep this world moving. So
that's right. Thanks, guys, and have a great evening. Have a great week, and make sure to share this with somebody who needs to hear it. You could be the game changer in their life. If you loved what you heard in today's episode of Game Changers, please subscribe and rate us. The lessons and the stories in these podcasts are immensely valuable, so I invite you to share them with a friend who needs to hear it. You may end up being the game changer in their lives.